Good morning, doctors. Good morning, nurses and PAs. We don't want to leave anybody out. My name is Michael Tetreault. I'm host of the Concierge Medicine Forum and the Docpreneur Leadership Podcast. You are about to listen to part 3 in our series with Michelle Fritsch, and she is a pharmacist, but also a bit of an entrepreneur, and she is helping doctors, helping healthcare workers and providers prepare for a happy, healthy, active retirement. And we're going to talk about in part 3 of our series. If you haven't listened to part 1 and 2, please go back and do so. You can access those in the links below. Michelle, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed these conversations.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about, in part 3, finding some relevance and meaning through the retirement life transition. Doctors, healthcare workers are preparing for retirement, but it's got to be intentional. It's not something that on this Friday, it's the day, Monday morning, I don't have to go into work anymore, and I'm just going to figure it out. Like, I figured out the finances, but I don't know what I'm going to do, because that's part of the fun of retirement. So we're going to talk about meaning and purpose and that intentionality that you must have before you make this life transition. So go ahead and kick us off.
All right. Just a little bit of a recap as to how we got here and why I've learned. I did not know this a few years ago. I have learned how important this is. We've already talked about, physical health and having a plan for physical health in retirement. And a big part of that is prevention. So digging deep into the risk factors and then creating plans to mitigate those for your client, for your patients, but also for yourself, for your own family, and how negativity and life events that haven't really been dealt with sometimes come out during times of big transition and make those transitions more difficult. So we spent that time on the physical health and the prevention side. In part 2, we talked about relationships and how those change. When we leave our primary occupation and head out into whatever comes next, a lot of times we find the people we spent all of our time with day to day are no longer around. They're still back at the workplace, still doing what we always did before. And suddenly we got to figure out who's our new social network. And so we spent a lot of time talking about that last time. So now we're going to bring in the other key element, I believe, which is who you're going to be in that next phase, both helping your patients figure that out, but you as a physician, nurse, PA, pharmacist, whatever, who are you going to be? Because we've been well defined by our medical careers and what happens afterwards. So I look forward to this conversation. I think there's a lot of important nuggets that we need to bring into the conversation and help people walk through.
Absolutely. Are you going to share your screen?
Yes,
Are you ready?
I am going to share my screen. There we go. Do we see it?
Yes.
I'm getting into the right format. So this is an area that really led to the entire creation of my business. I, in 30 years of healthcare, started really recognizing the number of people who had seemed healthy and seemed like they were living a meaningful life until retirement, and then their health declined so rapidly, or their life changed in a way they wouldn't have predicted that was negative, like a divorce. Um, and started recognizing when I got to know their stories how preventable that was. And so went out on this quest to say, how do we do this? How can we prevent these things that are happening that are ruining lives that have such tremendous potential to, rather than be on this negative course, they could really be doing amazing things in that next phase. So how do we help people get there? And I've learned that purpose, knowing who you are in the next phase, is so essential in all of that. So can I kind of describe that a little bit? Is
Yes,
that okay?
please.
All right. If you've watched parts 1 and 2, you'll see that when I think about health, I think about it so much more globally. And when I think about retirement, my best analogy I've been able to come up with is this windshield one. That when the windshield's muddy, you're not going to want to press on the gas because you can't see where you're going. You don't know if it's safe. You don't know what's in front of you. But as soon as we clear that windshield and you can see what that future looks like and get excited about it, I've had a number of clients actually move their retirement from, oh, maybe in 3 or 4 years to, I've got everything ready to go. I'm out of here in 6 months or 8 months, or by this time next year. That retirement has quickly moved up because that clarity came about. So that excites me. It's one of my favorite things when that happens. And I find a lot of times, like you just said, retirement happens. People focus on the finances and they try to predict at what point is the smart time for me to move away in a way that I feel like I've got all of my finances and insurances and all of that key underpinning ready to go. But they haven't really thought about themselves in that next phase of life. And I believe that we each have a purpose available to us in every phase, and it might be completely different. Those are my favorite stories, are when that purpose in the next phase is completely unrelated to what they did before. So a really recent story is somebody who was or still is, he hasn't quite retired, like a sales executive within the automotive industry. And he's been in sales his entire life. And when we started talking about this part, he was not excited to talk about it. He thought this was just some sort of frou-frou thing that was not pertinent to him. He had, been busy his entire life. He's just looking forward to the reduction in stress. But we went through a pretty extensive process. He did go through it, got access to an app. That's a great way to really kind of put your life in context and think about that next phase. And where he landed was he realizes he's got a great passion for the environment and the things that are happening and not happening right now. And so although retirement is still probably at least 2 or 3 years off, once he realized his interest in the environment, he actually went and sought out a nonprofit doing things that will help him learn more about this issue, and then requested a spot on their board of directors so that he could directly start getting involved. And if he does that for even 2 or 3 different boards over the next few years, when he retires, he will already have a much clearer idea of how he's going to plug into this thing. It's not going to become a job, probably won't get paid any money. It won't be his full-time pursuit, but it will be something that excites him, and it'll be one more legacy that he's able to leave in this lifetime. So when I think about purpose and health, I think that purpose is, I've learned, I think in 30 years, how integrally, did I say that right? Interrelated the health and the purpose are. So when someone retires and they lose their sense of self, that really tends to decrease motivation. And so I've seen at that point that people will often not take as good of care of themselves. They're not as physically active. They are not making the same health choices that they were making when they were busy and sort of squeezing lunch in between busy meetings. So as a result, often weight will increase, blood pressure will go up, diabetes will either become a thing or become more difficult to manage. Just general lifestyle choices tend to be a little more haphazard, if you will, and lead to a decline in physical health. And then on the mental side, when someone is not well defined, don't know their relevance in that next phase, if they lose that sense of who I am, depression and anxiety rates go way up on the mental health side. Socially, we talked about this last time, but with retirement, you can have such a switch in who you spend your time with every day. And there's some good data out there that when we're in the prime of our careers, we tend to have multiple meaningful interactions with other people every day. Those can be your peers, those can be your patients, those can be some of your staff members. They can be, family members of patients. They can be your own family, your own friends, but multiple meaningful impacts with other humans every day. And when someone doesn't have purpose and they don't really know who they are or have a plan for doing things in retirement, their number of daily meaningful interactions can significantly reduce. And with that then comes less happiness, less fulfillment, just a complete change in lifestyle. And similar on the emotional health, I've seen a number of people who just become angry or sullen or isolated because, again, they've just lost their sense of self. And the spiritual side, again, that's different for everyone. And I don't want to define what that is, but I have found that has been sort of an anchor that a number of people have used in figuring out their purpose for the next phase. Their spirituality helps them identify where their passions lie and where they want to engage in the world with the next phase. So just one more piece kind of along those lines. When you come down to just the basics of being human, we all need to be needed. And you look at this sort of hierarchy of needs, we all need to be needed. And if you've been a physician and your community relies heavily on you and your patients need you day in and day out, and suddenly all of that patient care has been assumed by someone else, and you're not the doctor, who are you? And that can be a tremendous transition time for any profession, but I think the healthcare professions especially struggle with that because we are so needed by other people, so defined what our role is, and then figuring out what that looks like later, finding that new sense of purpose can be troubling. Do you agree, Mike? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I think that there's a tendency for people to think that this is just naturally going, the purpose and my health are just naturally, I'm just going to naturally find my purpose the day, well, maybe within the week after I retire. And we've encouraged and nurtured the conversation with the doctors over the years to say, find a hobby, find what you enjoy doing, and share that with your patients, because it will make those relationships with your current patients deeper and richer, because you might have an interest in painting. And then, you know what? Well, with COVID, we found that a lot of um, people were taking online painting courses in the evening, and next thing you know, there's a doctor who's saying, I did the most neatest thing. It had nothing to do with healthcare, and I took an online Zoom course with an artist, a painter in Europe, and there was 100 of us on the Zoom call, and we painted a picture of the woods in a lake. And then next thing you know, you share that with a 3 or 4 patients, and they find that like one of those or 2 of those patients is like, that's so cool, can you send me the link? Like, I'm into painting too. He's like, yeah, have you tried out this stencil? Have you tried out this stuff? So how do doctors go about interviewing their hobbies?
Oh, I think for all of us, it's such a combination of things. Usually throughout life, and this like kind of gets to be pertinent with this. Throughout life, we have encountered things that really interested us, but we just didn't have the time, the bandwidth, the money, the whatever to pursue those. And so part of the process I work with people on going through is uncovering, remembering, pulling back some of those things. And the other one is along the way, you've acquired new people in your life, a spouse, maybe children, neighbors, long-term, high school friends that have continued to be friends. And together, you've maybe identified new things that you want to do or that you've already started to do, but you want to do more of it. And so incorporating those sorts of things, you've developed such a skill set. And that skill set it's certainly patient care, But when you break it down, it is so much more. You have developed a skill set that's great at communicating with other people. You can take complex ideas and make them understandable. You can also take simple ideas and incorporate really high level science. So your bandwidth of understanding concepts and explaining concepts is quite large. You've learned how to manage people and work successfully with others. So you've found probably particular, whether it's disease states or elements of people's lives, very interesting to you. You can take all these bits and pieces, but then reimagine them in some really new, unique, and fun for you way. So somebody that was a healthcare executive, actually, I was talking to him recently, and he remembered that he always liked guitar. When he was young, he played guitar. He hadn't done it in years. And now he's not only kind of relearning how to play guitar, because you're right, there's all this online education. So he's been able to get classes and really start playing. But he's gotten interested to the point that he's collecting old guitars and being able, learning how to fix them and tweak them, bring them back to their fully functioning version. And he's kind of learning, he said, music theory along the way, something he's never even thought about. But in learning how to play a song and break down a song and how it was written and why it's, why it appeals to him, he's learning music theory. And then on the social side, it's an opportunity, once things kind of open up, to go out and just jam with other people, go create music together. And so it is sort of filled all those layers of meaning and purpose for him, at least for now. And it's not his whole purpose, as a healthcare professional. He serves on some boards of directors. He's still quite an influential person in his community, but he hasn't had to maintain licenses and things that he did before, because his focus with his skill set has moved.
So, and you may be covering this in maybe the next slide or two, but I want to focus on particularly the males listening in the audience, because men, I know from my wife, I can see that she has had this core group of friends for years and years now. And, we always think, as you get older, you start to think a little bit more about what, life may be like for them when your health deteriorates. Maybe once the male is gone, the husband is gone, how will she be taken care of, the family be taken care of? And, not to be morbid, but in a more practical sense, you see that the females of the family usually have a core group of friends, or tend to be, and the research bears this out, is that they're much more relational. They keep those friends. Whereas we as males, well, I'm busy, I got work, I'm busy taking care of the family. Well, it's just the same thing. The research proves this out too. Like, okay, I've had 2 or 3 kids, and we got 4 grandkids now. And I know I've been displaced and I've been busy for the last 18 to 23 years of their life, or they're growing up. And now I'm retired and I want to have something to do with my kids. And it's kind of like your family's like, nice. Hi, my name's your son, and it's nice to meet you. We've never really met or connected before, but now you're in retirement and you want to just overwhelm us with your time without having built the relationship over the years. And, for some families that can work, but for very few we see. And so what can men in particular do to prepare now for that future retirement so that they are connected relationally? I've been disconnected from my core group of guys, but I know if I call them, they'll be right there. Well, you haven't talked to them in 10, 15, 20 years. They're not just going to drop everything and, hey, buddy, great to hear from you. I'm retired too. Want to do something? And that's not just going to naturally happen. So what can men do? What have you seen in your experience with your clients, particularly those who work in healthcare that have these busy lives, and they need to get busy?
There's a a tool that I use with people as they're preparing for retirement that it addresses exactly that. And of all the tools I have, there are 16 total. This is the one that has caused more men to actually sob, break down and cry. And these are not men that typically cry. But when we break down who are the key relationships right now, and then we think it through on a couple of levels. One is as you consider retirement and you're ready to start telling people about this, what's the logical order to share this information? Because there are going to be a lot of people, you don't want to hear this through the grapevine. So what is your plan to disseminate the information within your own control of who should find out when? But in doing that, we also kind of walk through which relationships are going to sustain and how are they going to sustain? Because you're not sitting, they're not the office next door, so you just naturally go to lunch together. Your schedules are no longer going to align with one another. So what are you going to do to purposefully either maintain that relationship, rebuild that relationship, sort of re-engage with that relationship, like you were saying? And in general, women are a little more cognizant of that in life and tend to have more connections overall. The number of times we've wanted to do something and my wife or my husband hands the phone to me and says, my wife is our social coordinator. She'll take it from here. They put the wives on the phone to figure it out. So it's not true in every family, but often it's the woman that has stayed more connected with family, more extended family, old friends from the past, people in the neighborhood. They know kind of what's going on a little bit more. And even men, I'm thinking right now, specific recent clients, men who have sustained some great relationships, friends from high school or college or earlier times in their career, or even I know several men who retired kind of at the same time who had worked together. So they actually do keep doing things together. There's 3 men that just popped in my head who have taken up bicycling. And so they all worked in the same place for a number of years. And now they're all biking together and trying out new trails all around. But there have been a few instances where men go to reconnect with old friends and it's just not as tight as it once was because they haven't nurtured those relationships over time. So I would say that it's not that those relationships are gone, but it's going to take a little rebuilding sometimes to get back there. And men that start that process a little bit earlier are further along when retirement comes with some plans to really connect with those people rather than retire and then call them and kind of start at that point. Because to your point, if it takes a while to rebuild a relationship, you've got a period of time there where you're not feeling very connected.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And, for
It's a
those
really great
doctors,
thing. You've got an idea, you've got a medical practice, you've got patients who come in and out, but that thing that you want to do called concierge medicine, there's a learning curve to it. Do you want to accept insurance? Do you want to participate in Medicare? Do you want to do a hybrid practice? What's your staff going to look like? Are you going to incorporate different tests inside of the office? And if you're interested in me speaking a little bit of truth to you, and sometimes it's not as easy as we think. We want somebody to just say, oh yeah, you can do this right away. It'll take you like a week. Sometimes we don't really want to hear that. There's the learning curve to this. And the speakers that you're going to hear, the presentations and courses that you have access to within this community are here designed especially for you. Please go check them out. Let the notes flow, a symphony. Now I can say things different.
Yeah. And considering, I need to probably make some phone calls, or I need to call my son or my daughter, or, make a trip out there. Start those things now. Don't wait until day number 4 of retirement where you got nothing else to do, because you know what? They're busy too. And you got to put in the time now, put in the sweat equity I work with Habitat for Humanity as well. And if you don't put in the sweat equity, you don't get the house.
Right.
And you won't get the relationship benefits later on in retirement that will keep you happy, healthy, and active, and mentally and emotionally happy, healthy, and active. Because as a healthcare provider, sitting inside of the exam room, kneecap to kneecap with the patients that you see every day, you know what happens when you don't follow good advice. And certainly our guest, Michelle Fritsch today of retirewellness.com, is sharing some great recipes for success. So I'll let you go ahead and continue on your slides.
Okay. This is a study that was done a while back, pre-COVID, but it just really summed up that even while still working, how many people aren't really fulfilled by what they are doing, haven't really found their purpose. And it's large numbers of people. They found that 9 out of 10 people would give up 23% of their salary to really find that source of meaning and purpose in what they're doing. And then there's good data, if you focus here at the bottom, that having purpose, living your life aligned with, I know why I am and what I'm meant to do, really enhances your overall health. And when you lose that, there's cognitive decline, your blood pressure goes up, your blood sugar goes up, kind of like we talked about before, a lot of health decline that's associated with that. And I just want to share a quote because I think it's powerful, that people who labor all their lives but have no purpose to direct that thought and impulse and energy toward are wasting their time, even when they're hard at work. So it goes beyond being busy. We can be busy doing a number of things, and that helps. But man, when it's purpose, when it's something that just drives you, it's so much different. So an example that I heard when I was doing my purpose training is a man who had retired, moved to Florida, but when he got off the plane in Florida, the thing that struck him was the lack of trees. Why were there so few trees in this part of Florida where he found himself? So he started planting trees, and it started as a small thing. But then in doing so, he got involved in more and more other groups and organizations that were interested in the environment. He found a little bit of funding. He got more people on board. He helped people find that, if you plant a tree in honor of an event or a person, that's a great time to plant a tree. And by the time he passed away, first of all, he was still actively pursuing this purpose because he was so excited about it beyond the age of 100. Wow. But when he passed away, his legacy was everywhere to be seen because there were all of these trees, but also all these people that had come alongside him and also participated in this area of purpose. So he wasn't just busy and not just working on a hobby. He was really engaged with this thing and making his mark. There's a man I've been talking to who is a sales executive that travels all the time, but he's fortunate enough to live in a community that is somewhat near the coast. And it's been bothering him to see how much erosion is occurring on the coastline. So prior to retirement, he is already getting involved with a local group that is worried about the same thing. He's already kind of learning what's being done, but also what could be done. And with his vast network of people that he knows, he's got a plan that when he retires, he's going to pour and pull those things together to really help with this erosion issue that's gotten his attention. So it's not like a second job. It won't consume all of his time. He'll still travel and golf and do all those fun things, but he'll also have a purpose for which he wants to spend quite a bit of his efforts in that next phase of life.
Wow. Well, and I am thinking of, that brings to mind a story, and I'll let you go ahead and I'll share that story about a doctor that shared his hobbies with us.
Yeah.
2 doctors I can think of. One in particular, I think he was in Michigan, and he said, "I'm an active cycler. Like I spent too much money on these bikes, and he shared that with his patients, and he's like, now we do, a cycling group, and, it's not competitive. I mean, yeah, there's a little competitive every now and then, but some of the patients are new to bicycling, so it's kind of like me teaching them, what somebody once taught me. And
Right.
another doctor I can think of, and I know he's probably listening and smiling because when I tell his story, he'll know exactly who it is. He said, what being a doctor has allowed me to do is become a better farmer. And he has a lot of kids, a lot of grandkids. He's investing time now in his 50s and 60s. He's investing that time, that sweat equity into the relationship. It's not all fun and games. He has to change diapers, I mean, it's just how it is that you put in the time if you want to have that relationship later on. It's not just about being there for the birthday dinners, and you got to show up and you got to be dependable if you want to, have those relationships later in life, because a day is soon coming where you're going to be alone in a room and you're going to see, say, man, I wish I would have invested years ago in these relationships, because my friend, he just passed away, and he lived here in the city. He lived literally 7 miles away, and I saw him 4 times in the last decade. And he and I were best friends. We still were, but he passed away. And it's time
Mhm.
now, if you're listening, to start putting the time into those relationships now. And so I'll let you go ahead and continue. And then our next question will be about how do we go about identifying our purpose.
So I'm going to stop the slides for a second because I think this is such an important topic. For some people, they have identified, there's something that just they're passionate about. I think I shared before a gentleman who, once he started really thinking about it in the context of outside of his profession, what interests him, what is going on in the world that he wants to help fix. And he loves kids, and he knows how very important those first few weeks of life are in sort of neurologic development and um, bonding and such. And so he goes and rocks neonates at a neonatal ICU. He was in the airline industry, so it's
Hmm.
complete change. And it's not all of his time. It's not a new job. It's just something that he feels so passionately about, and realize it's an area where he can have a big impact. Think,
So,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about all of my physician and other medical colleagues through the years. I've seen the medical profession, I think, struggle with this more because it is so well defined who we are. And our relationships with other people are deep and trusting. And, especially in the primary care world, they go for years and years and years. We've been to births, we've been to the funerals. I've got baby blankets, that patients have made over time, and other gifts. It's a really dear relationship. And when you're not their doctor anymore, they're not necessarily going to have that reason to still interact with you. And if they do, it's going to be different. And so there's that piece that those really tight relationships are going to change. And preemptively thinking about that and planning for that and having yourself mentally ready for that is huge. But the other piece of this that's really hard is, at some point, you're going to give up your license. It's just not going to make financial sense. It's not going to make sense of your time to try to maintain all those CE hours and all of the other obligations, all the funding to keep up your insurance and keep up your license. So at some point, you're going to choose to walk away from that. And you've dedicated your entire life to it. And so I would encourage you to start thinking about that now. It's not the kind of thing that can be decided overnight for most people. But really think about, what have you learned? What have you gained? Where do you want to focus that amazing skill set next, in a
I,
way that is so fulfilling that it's okay to give up that license? Because that's really big. It's a big decision.
recently was at a funeral for a physician, and he was so well regarded that traffic was, I mean, parking around the church was so difficult to get to. I mean, it was like 5 blocks of just, it was not great parking for that church, period. But
Yeah.
just imagine, 500 cars trying to go to this little tiny church because and what was interesting was, so many of them said, yeah, I knew, I'm not going to use his real name, but yeah, I knew Bob, and it's like, he was a person. He wasn't an identity. He wasn't a label to the people around him. And so often we see this identity, especially from those in healthcare, because I always say I'm not a physician, but I am a patient. And so I know what it's like to be on the other side of you. And when I bump into a healthcare worker or a physician in particular who, mandates that everyone in the office, everyone who he interacts with personally outside the practice has nothing to do with healthcare. I'm Dr. So and so. That's fine. That's great. But we're also in a non-clinical setting. I get that you work that hard, but we're talking about cooking right now. We're talking about bicycling. We're not talking about healthcare. And what I really thought so well and so highly why people so highly regarded this physician that had passed away was he was a person to them. He had an identity outside of the exam room that people felt comfortable to know him. They felt like they did know him, even though they were removed, 4 steps away from him and his family. They, knew him as Bob. And I think that you're absolutely correct that those listening have got to think about starting to release that identity and create a new identity. And you'll find that it's going to be so enriching, so rewarding if you start planning now for that. And the wormholes of knowledge that you don't know, yeah, you're a smart person. You're a doctor. You're like the smartest person we all know, but there's a lot of wormholes of education and knowledge inside the libraries, inside of our communities, on YouTube University, so to speak, that you don't know about, that you're going to find genuine interest in. So our question for you, Michelle Fritsch of retirewellness.com, you can click on retirewellness.com, or you can also learn more about Michelle in the links below and access part 1 and 2. But what is the difference between a hobby and a dream in the clients that you're working with and the work that you do?
I think that's a key question and such an important one, because I know a number of people who fill up their time. So I know a number of people who don't know what to do with themselves, and Netflix binging is not the answer to a healthy retirement. Then there are people who add hobbies, and it is true. I mean, the more hobbies, the more engaged, the more active you're going to be, especially if some of those can be physically active sorts of hobbies. That makes a big positive difference. And then if you can interact with your kids and your grandkids and your spouse with those hobbies, even better. But then I think a level above that is the purpose piece, which is more that what's that internal motivation? What is that next thing in life where you can make a difference that will impact your world, whether it is the kids in your community or the kids in your own family, or it is some aspect of your community, like the man that wants to help with the erosion of the seashore, of the seaside, whether it is impacting things that bother you in this world that you want to go be a piece of. So I know people that have gone off, to do missions in other areas, people who started going to the jails to visit with people because they recognized, that there's certain levels of communication and education and bonding that are lacking. It can be a number of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cause, but if it excites you and engages you in that next level, so not just busy with a hobby, but so inspired by this thing that you've just got to be part of it, those tend to be the people that have that most healthy transition and live a long time I like to think of it, they come across the finish line at the end of life and they're battered and dirty and their shoes fell off as they were sliding across home plate. And they're like, man, that was a wild ride. I loved it.
Yeah.
I would much prefer people have a plan to figure how to do that than to live the next 30 years having declined and then live at a state of lower function that they never intended.
And I know that there's some interest out there, particularly in religion and faith. And let's say you're at the point where you're just like, I don't want to see patients, but I still kind of want to be involved, see my colleagues, but I don't want the malpractice. I don't want to be the MD, the DO, the RN, PA. I don't want to be that label anymore. One of the ways I remember speaking with a chaplain trainer years ago for a religious post-grad school, and he said, you'd be surprised at how many physicians or nurses come and learn chaplaincy and then go to their local hospital where they live and have worked for the last 40, 50 years. And that's their new role. They do it as a volunteer thing. Some of them, get a stipend. Some of them get paid. But it's a way to still have that hallway interaction, that doctor's lounge interaction. But it's a way for them to, stay connected with people and strangers by going inside of the room and saying, hey, I'm so and so, and actually, funny enough, I used to work here, and I don't anymore. I'm a chaplain, and I'm here to just ask you a few questions, visit with your family. That for some of you listening, depending upon your interest level, that might be something to investigate for a year or two. And you like working in the hospital. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's new ways and creative ways that you can find and explore, but start asking those questions now. Start, learning those things, because I guarantee you don't know everything out there. You don't know how to make a great cup of coffee, but you're going to in retirement. You're going to go down the wormhole of how to make an espresso. And let me tell you, I know from personal experience, that wormhole is deep, but I have made a better cup of coffee than I ever have before. It's not great, but it's much better than it was. So I'll let you go ahead and continue. Our guest today is Michelle Fritsch. She's of Retire Wellness. You can go to retirewellness.com, click on the links above and below.
I'm just going to share one more thing. So, especially the healthcare world, I think will very much resonate with this. But again, the reason I'm doing this is I have found that someone has such a successful career, and then they can just kind of a picture just fall off the cliff without some planning, leading to things like a health decline that nobody anticipated. Either because they didn't pay good attention to their health, they weren't taking care of themselves, which in healthcare we're really bad about that. In general, we tend to take a whole lot better care of other people than we do of ourselves. Or it could be that they get there and again they just lose themselves, which causes the rapid health decline. Divorce rates are going up, and a piece of that is neglected relationships that then have to be pieced back together upon retirement. So take action now so that that is not the case that you're experiencing. Some people lose themselves so deeply that it leads to despair, and suicide rates are rising. I do not want that for anyone. And then declining relationships, that everything that we've talked about, that you had such a busy social calendar and just didn't realize that it was very work related and was not, without careful planning, going to carry over into that next phase of life of retirement or whatever you do next. So I have found that there can be a successful bridge of all of the health pieces that we talked about in part one, all of the relationship building and acquiring steps that we talked about in part two, and then finding that purpose for the next phase of life are the key elements to that successful career, or that phase after your successful career, that successful retirement, whatever that looks like for you. I think I've mentioned these before, but two men just popped into mind who retired, and within a year they went back and found another job, not because they needed the money, but they didn't find what they wanted to do and who they wanted to be. And I also think I shared a story of a man who was very physically oriented. He'd been a professional athlete, and physical pursuits were kind of his only hobbies, the only things he was interested in. So it took us a while to realize that we needed a deeper set of activities. And he found, especially during COVID, when he got more comfortable with Zoom, that he could coach kids around the world that really wanted opportunities for college scholarships to do what he so successfully had done and give them those chances that they might not have otherwise had. So digging for that purpose sometimes takes some effort, but boy, it's well worth the journey.
Wow. And there are organizations out there, another opportunity for physicians, if you do keep your license for a few more years, but you don't want to practice in the brick and mortar buildings, is, telehealth visits. Telehealth companies are, increasingly looking for qualified candidates to take on high need cases, the ones that require an hour. That visit is a visit with the spouse and the, you know, uh, mentally, I wouldn't say, it's the caregiver, it's the patient and the caregiver. Those are the calls that don't necessarily, they can vacuum up a doctor's time. And as you know, in a busy practice and a busy medical culture, your time is valuable. And if you were to assist a colleague with some of those calls, take 10 patients and you meet with an hour a week with every single patient. That's 10 hours of your maybe 15, 30, 20 hours. That's another option, to keep your mind involved, keep your abilities and your skill sets involved, but just kind of, you're on the upward trajectory of going into retirement, but you're also not on the downward in a negative sense, but on the downward spiral of like, okay, I got a plan. I kind of enjoy this. And hey, 4 o'clock, what was it? We talked with a concierge doctor just recently, or somebody, one of the consultants, CEOs did. He called up one of his doctors and he said, "Hey, what'd you doing today?" He's like, "Oh, I finished seeing patients and I was bored, so I went to the hospital to go see patients." So, that's really great, and we're glad that there are stories out there like that encourage and provide, I think, some hope for those physicians that are struggling with their career, and we definitely want to see them succeed. So our guest today is Michelle Fritsch. As we come in for a landing, Michelle is going to share with us what are some tips for doctors to be able to share with their patients. Let's turn the corner here as we come in for this landing and land this plane. What are some tips that doctors can say? Okay, I'm going to leave this podcast. I'm going to go webinar. I'm going to go talk to my patients. But maybe what's one or two questions that they can now present inside of the exam room?
I think I would start with if somebody get any inkling that retirement's on the horizon, just ask them about that. Are they considering retirement? When might that happen? And then challenge them with a couple of these questions about, well, who will you be? What will be your purpose, your hobbies, your activities in that next phase, just to get them to start thinking about it. You don't have to have the answers, but ask the questions. And then on the physical health side, by knowing that timeline of retirement, you can plan all of those baseline screenings to be sure you've got a good baseline, cancer screenings, cardiovascular screenings prior to that date of retirement, because their insurance right now in their primary career is probably much more robust than what their insurance will be after. So if you take advantage of that in collecting all of this data, it will benefit that person for the long term.
And we asked physicians over the last couple of years, as a physician, do you have a will, an executed power of attorney, and or living will? And you might be surprised to find out that 21% said, yeah, I have a power of attorney. 18% said, I have not acquired or executed any of these documents. So that means that 2 out of every 10, which is, that's good. That means 80% are doing something right. They've acquired a living will, a state-specific will. 11% said, yeah, I have these documents, but they're older than 5 to 10 years old, and they got to be updated. And these are things that you can talk with your patients about. You should just casually mention, you could be a young patient, old patient, but if you're a doctor and it's your job, to take care of their mental and health and well-being, one of the best ways that you can give them a reminder, a gentle reminder, to say, hey, Mike, do you have that taken care of? You have those documents taken care of for your family? Oh, yeah, it's a good point. I need to do that. I haven't done that since our first kid was born, and I probably should do that because now we have 4 kids. And additionally, a number of doctors say, I have never considered telling my patients to update these documents. So those are some helpful handles that I think also help, especially the older patients that you might have. And maybe we're giving you homework and you're listening and saying, you know what? Dang it, I haven't even updated my own documents. I probably need to do that. Well, consider that job number 1 on day number 1 of your retirement, but maybe day number 2.
I think I had a brilliant thought that just left me, so it will come back. Oh, I think a piece of that is knowing that as the doctor, you're one of the most trusted relationships in that person's life, above and beyond, maybe beyond family, probably the most trusted person in their life. And so they're going to listen to you when you bring up these things and talk about their importance. You've got that kind of influence for them.
Yeah. It's just like, when your dad says, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. It's like, oh, it's crushing, right? And I always say, look, the main thing, the page that you can always guarantee that's updated on a medical practice website is the bio or the about us, about your doctor page. And I would say as patients, we scan it, but we don't really dive deep into it. Yet it's this long. And what we really want to know is, you have to understand, doctors or nurses and PAs, if you're listening, is 5 words from you mean more than 50 words about you. And so that relationship matters. You have that weight. Your words carry a lot of weight. You have cancer. You're doing great. Congratulations. You were only supposed to lose 10 pounds. You lost 13. I am so proud of you. And you know what? I'm going to give you a surprise. I'm even going to write you a thank you, a congratulations note and a $5 gift card to Starbucks as a surprise when you leave here, and you're not even going to know it, because I'm so glad that you followed your goals and we have that relationship and rapport. Our guest today has been Michelle Fritsch of retirewellness.com. Go ahead and pull up your slide that has your book, your contact information as well. And now that we've put together all 3 of these parts of retirement planning, we've talked about physician burnout, we've talked about health and mental well-being, mental health, purpose in finding purpose in your retirement. Let's wrap all of this up in a way that physicians, nurses, those listening can apply it to their own lives and their own patients. And then I have one more bonus question for you. They'll come a little bit out of right field or left field, whatever, for you, that I want to ask. It's more of a personal question for your clients that you're working with.
Okay, great. So I hope this has made some sense, and that it's never too early to at least start applying some of these concepts, thinking about that next phase for your own life. I mean, if we're all so fortunate to reach that point when we've successfully completed our primary career and we've got some years, maybe decades beyond that to fill, how can you take the best care of yourself? And that can start the day you enter medical school or beyond or before. How can you take the best care of yourself so that your later self will thank you? How can you identify your key relationships and sustain those throughout that time so that those relationships will be there for you when you finish? And then how can you, along the way, as you're accumulating interests and some skills, just kind of be thinking about what pushes your buttons, what gets you excited out there that you want to be a part of, that you can then be released from your medical practice and go off and pursue those things later. Because that, from everything I'm seeing, is one of the key ingredients to a long, fulfilling, really meaningful retirement.
And this is truly an exciting time for those. I mean, we've talked a lot about the negatives, to the pitfalls, to, like the Indiana Jones crossing that cave, that you have to step on the right stones to make sure that you do retirement right. This is something that you can be excited about as you consider what your retirement's going to look like, because you probably did, as a healthcare provider, take really good care of yourself, or, you probably indulged a little bit sometimes too. But, over the last 30, 40 years, you've taken fairly good care of yourself because you knew what to do. And retirement can sometimes hit healthcare workers, like a fire hose in the face. Like, I'm not looking forward to retirement at all. And I'm a little scared and worried, to be honest, because I've seen what has happened to my friends, my colleagues. And this is something that hopefully these tips, you can go back and listen. You can contact Michelle. She can help you. Her team is very good. This is what they do. And you're also a pharmacist, so you understand the clinical side of retirement as well. So our personal question for you is, if you were to, close up retirement wellness strategies today, you're handing over the keys to, your second in command, but you are just like, I'm going to go and hang out in Bermuda on a beach, and I'm never going to think about this topic again. I've done my work. I've finished the race. What's one story that comes to mind that you feel as though ties exactly who they followed your advice, or, that you're just like, I can die happy knowing that I accomplished and finished the race?
You know what? How fun to even think about that question, and to sometimes it's those little things where you make an impact along the way and you realize, wow, maybe that's why I'm on the planet, was to allow that to happen. Interestingly, though, as you asked it, the one that first came to mind was, I was at a dinner. It was a church dinner, and I happened to get seated with a bunch of really young ladies, which was fun, and got to hear their stories and what they were doing. And one had she was actually a nurse, and had a dream of being able to provide obstetric services in a part of West Africa that currently had a very high infant mortality rate, but she had 1,000 reasons why she couldn't do that. And just sitting there together that day and everybody brainstorming together, we found ways for her to jump each of those hurdles, and that's exactly what she went off and did. So if my being at that table on that night to have that conversation with that woman impacted so many lives, that's a life well lived.
It reminds me just of the movie. It's on Netflix right now that my kids and I just watched, our family watched, called Yes Day. And it's where parents say yes to anything their kids ask for an entire day. And, when we have these dreams, we have these hobbies, we have these interests that we haven't, uncovered yet. I think of another guy, he, is learning. He's like, you know what? I've never wanted a canoe in my life, but now that I'm retired, I want a canoe and I want to learn all about it. I want to learn about the paddling. I want to learn about what different types of canoes are. I've been down that wormhole too, because I'm a scout and a camper and a scout leader.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of different types of kayaks and canoes out there. And so the world is so much bigger and broader once you hit that area of, I've got the time to be able to learn this. And pick, I think it was, we were talked off air for those that are just joining us, we talked a little bit about core pursuits. And one of a financial advisors said, look, unhappy retirees have 1.6 core pursuits or interests or hobbies or dreams that they're currently doing actively in retirement. And the average happy, healthy, mentally challenged in a positive way, retiree has 3.9 hobbies, interests, active things that they're doing on a daily basis. And so that's what it's all about. That's why we're here talking with Michelle Fritsch of Retire Wellness. Go to retirewellness.com. Thank you, Michelle. This has been an incredible series, and looking forward to maybe even the second part of our series that we do something else. And you come back and you tell some more stories about how you've helped doctors and nurses and healthcare workers find joy in their retirements. And we just share, stories, powerful stories that are unique and that others can learn from. I could definitely see that being even a part 4. So thanks, Michelle. Connect with Michelle at retirewellness.com. Any final thoughts, Michelle, before we jump off?
Something that I didn't share that I should have. You and I were just talking about my opportunity to go and be introduced to a group, like a think tank of healthcare entrepreneurs. That's a great place that physicians, nurses, PAs could use some of their skills, is helping some of these budding, whether they're web-based companies or other types of service companies, with their expertise to say, as a clinician with years of experience, here's what you need to know as you develop this product or this service. They could be an amazing resource for all of these new upcoming businesses.
Absolutely. And every city has these meetups, these entrepreneurial centers where ideas are incubating, startups are incubating, and it doesn't have to be just specifically related to healthcare. It could be about apple trees, and how we're doing a disservice in our state to the apple to the apple cart. Who knows what it might be, but every now and then we talk with Dr. Lou about there's different areas where you can contribute to your local community, to your society. It doesn't have to be, practicing medicine inside of the 4 walls of an exam room or on a Zoom call. It could be, maybe you have an interest in real estate. Maybe you have an interest in books. You wrote a book. I've known several people who are much, much older than I am, but they've retired, and it seems as though now I'm in my mid 40s and people around me are retiring that I know. And, I've seen someone write 2 books in his retirement now. So thank you for your time, Michelle. And it's been great. We look forward to catching up with you again very soon.
Thank you.
One of my pain points in medicine, and that is, why the hell do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? I would ask anybody out there practicing medicine, why the hell do we have waiting rooms? So that patients can come in to figure out how healthy they are for their annual exam while you sit them down next to somebody who's sick. So they've now given you time and money to leave your office experience sicker than when they showed up. I do not believe in waiting rooms.
If you start to believe in what you're doing, fear tends to become less of an issue. The first step is really
Thanks,
reaching
man. It's
out.
great to be here, especially to be here with so many people that think the same and are all focused on the same thing, the patient. And I love being a part of it. So thanks for having me on today, Mike.
Absolutely.
Accepting that growth mindset. That's another thing that I've been reading about recently. Accepting our growth mindset and not thinking that, well, the system has failed me or I've failed in this particular situation, but really thinking about, what have I learned? What can I bring with me that's useful to whatever I do next? How can I apply this thing that I've learned to whatever that next step might be for me? I think really those are some of the most helpful things that we can do, sort of starting from with, that's me being defensive. What is going on for me? So the more
physicians and leaders can continuously look inward, introspect what's happening for me. And I would recommend do not ask why questions. There is research from an organizational psychologist named Tasha Eurich. She is an expert in self-awareness, and she speaks about introspection. She finds that people who introspect with why questions are actually less happy than even those who don't bother to be introspective at all. Use what questions. Really drive what's happening for me, what's the story in my head, what is it that I want here, what can I do differently, and keep the attention here. So if I feel any kind of flare-up or tension, we tend to constrict, right? So like I worked with one leader who his tendency when he got defensive was you would literally could see that he would get rigid, right? And it would be all through his shoulders and his neck and like his head, and like everything about it was different. So here's something really, really goofy. Can you wiggle? In a conversation, if it feels like it's going off course, can you in that moment, like, do you have the ability to wiggle your body? I know that I don't when I'm feeling defensive. And that is a test for me. That is a sign that I am defensive, and I can make a shift. I can go, oh, some kind of insecurity is being triggered in me, which means that I'm not showing up my best. What is happening for me? What is the story in my head that's causing that level of trigger and that level of defensiveness and that level of rigidity? Because when I get rigid, it's going to invite other people to also get defensive.
Access to me 24/7, and is my phone going to be ringing constantly off the hook? And how will I have a life of my own? And I found that the large majority of patients are not calling and texting you 24/7. But I think there's reassurance in knowing that they can, if that makes any sense. Just knowing that you will be there for me.
In small practice, we know that this is how we stay in business, by knowing business. And so to us, in solo and small group, and especially concierge medicine, these skills are part and parcel of taking good care of the patient.
What your patient has a problem is important, and I think that's where being a concierge physician gives me the edge, because I know my patient. I know who's a complainer, I know who's not a complainer. So if someone comes in and says, I feel short of breath and I'm a little winded, and he never does it, I know there is an issue. So I need to catch that up, and that is the key. And the most important thing is that I need to be mindful when I'm in the patient's room. If I'm in a patient's room and I'm thinking about, oh, I have to do that today, or I have to talk to Michael 2 hours later, then I'm not really paying attention and catching the vibes that my patient is giving me. So being there present and not looking at the computer screen and seeing in patient's eye, I think is the best answer I can give you. Exam will follow. If you don't catch what the person is saying, you won't do the right exam or test.
And we're coming in for a landing.
So, one of my mentors, John Maxwell, I'm sure you know John.
Oh, yeah.
What he taught me a long time ago is this, Charlie, adding value to yourself, that's success, and that's okay. But when you add value to others, that's called significance, right? And I like that approach. And I've learned if I can give to people that need help, doctors, if I can just give, and I can show you how to implement, and I can coach you.
Together, we can remind everyone of what skills it requires to come across authentically and to build trust with patients in a virtual world. But also, how do we use these foundational communication skills in all of our interactions?
And for a lot of physicians, as you well know, you've had those conversations around the coffee table and kitchen table and island.
And that there are competing healthcare platforms and visions. And I'm not afraid to talk about it. So it no matter who wins this.
We're all in this together, and the more we love and support each other through it, the easier it's going to be on the other side.
Like we tell our kids at home, my wife and I, we make sure you wash those thumbs. You can't forget about washing those thumbs too, because it's easy to wash the other 4 fingers. But
let the notes flow like a symphony. Now I can say things differently.
Yeah. It's a really great thing. You've got an idea. You've got a medical practice. You've got patients who come in and out. But that thing that you want to do called concierge medicine, there's a learning curve to it. Do you want to accept insurance? Do you want to participate in Medicare? Do you want to do a hybrid practice? What's your staff going to look like? Are you going to incorporate different tests inside of the office? And if you're interested in me speaking a little bit of truth to you, and sometimes it's not as easy as we think. We want somebody, I know, we want somebody to just say, Oh yeah, you can do this right away. It'll take you like a week. Sometimes we don't really want to hear that. There's the learning curve to this. And the speakers that you're going to hear, the presentations and courses that you have access to within this community are here designed especially for you. Please go check them out.